The email from Morgan Technologies sat in my inbox like a ticking time bomb. Urgent environmental compliance consultation request. I could practically smell the panic leaking through their carefully sanitized corporate language. It was poetic, really. My brother's company, the same one that had mocked my useless environmental science degree for years, now faced millions in fines and the looming threat of shutdown for environmental violations, and I was the only consultant who could possibly save them. Miss Parker? Jade's voice buzzed through the intercom. Your brother's called every hour. Still want me to block him? I smiled, remembering last Thanksgiving, the last time I'd seen James Morgan, CEO of Morgan Technologies, my brilliant older brother, who had never passed up a chance to mock my career. Environmental consulting? He'd scoffed, swirling a glass of aged scotch. Come on, Sarah, when are you going to get a real job, one worthy of the Morgan name? Our parents had nodded in smug agreement. Dad, the founder himself, had added his usual knife twist. Environmental science, what a waste, she could have been leading RD by now. None of them had noticed that my tiny firm had become one of the most respected environmental compliance agencies in tech, too busy building an empire to see they were laying the groundwork for its collapse. Put him through next time, I told Jade. I think it's time we talked. I turned toward the window, Seattle's skyline glinting beneath the afternoon sun. Morgan Technologies Tower dominated the view, 60 gleaming stories of glass and steel, built on innovation, and, as I knew all too well, a foundation of environmental shortcuts. The phone rang within seconds. Sarah, James said, the arrogance in his voice had vanished. Thank God, we need to talk. About what? I kept my tone flat. The regulatory violations, the toxic waste you dumped that's about to go public, or the falsified compliance reports? Silence. How do you know about that? Because I'm excellent at what I do, James. You might have noticed, if you weren't so busy sneering at my career. I could almost hear him squirm. Look, we need your help. The EPA audit found exactly what I warned you about 3 years ago. I cut in. When I told you your disposal methods were illegal. Ring any bells? More silence. He remembered. Environmental regulations are for tree huggers. I quoted. Real tech companies can't innovate if they're worrying about a few chemicals. Sarah, please, we're staring down millions in penalties. The board's talking about shutting down our main facility. I opened the folder on my desk, the real environmental impact report my team had compiled. It made the EPA's findings look tame. You're not just looking at fines, James. When the full report surfaces, you're looking at criminal charges. Dad could go to prison. His voice cracked. What? I asked. Too much? Let me remind you. Protected wetlands, falsified emissions reports, groundwater contamination due to negligence. I flipped a page for dramatic effect. Want me to keep going? How long have you known? I've been documenting Morgan Technologies violations since I founded my firm. Watching, waiting, preparing. I knew this day would come, just didn't expect you'd be desperate enough to call me. A heavy silence followed. I could almost hear the sound of him sinking into his leather chair. Mom and Dad have no idea how bad this is. The board meeting's tomorrow. We need a miracle. I smiled, sharp and cold. No, what you need is a full compliance overhaul, one that'll cost more than your entire RD budget. You need someone who understands both environmental law and tech manufacturing. Lucky for you, I do. I paused, then added. My consulting fees just tripled, and that's just the entry point. Full remediation will cost significantly more. That's extortion. No, James, that's the price of ignoring the science you dismissed as worthless. Jade's voice returned through the intercom. Your next appointment is here, the EPA director. She wants to discuss Morgan Technologies. I heard James's sharp breath. He hadn't realized how high up my connections went. The board meets at 9 a.m. He said quickly. Will you come? Text me the details, I replied. And James, make sure Dad's there. He should hear exactly what his shortcuts have cost the company. I hung up and turned back to the window. Morgan Technologies gleamed in the morning sun, a monument to innovation, concealing years of environmental negligence. I'd spent a decade documenting every secret they buried under concrete and polished glass, while they laughed at my career. Should I prep the full presentation? Jade asked. Yes, I said, all of it. Let's show them what environmental science can really do. I opened my drawer and pulled out a worn graduation photo, The day I told my family I was choosing environmental science over the family empire. Mom had cried. Dad had raged. James had laughed. "Have fun hugging trees," he said, "while I build an empire." Now, his empire was on the brink, and the only thing that could save it was the very science he called worthless. My phone buzzed. A message from Dad. "Whatever James is offering, I'll double it. This needs to go away." I laughed. They still didn't get it. This was never about the money. It was about proving what they refused to believe, that environmental science isn't optional, it's essential. And I was about to teach them that lesson in the most expensive way possible. The next morning, I stood in my office, finalizing the presentation. Every violation, every shortcut, every arrogant decision was neatly packaged and ready for delivery. Jade's voice came through the intercom. "The board's gathering, your father's pacing, James looks like he might be sick." Good. I collected my materials, let them sweat. Revenge is satisfying, but accountability is better, and I was about to serve both. "Time to show them what a worthless degree can do," I said, stepping into the elevator. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. 15 executives turned to face me, recognition dawning in their eyes, along with something new, fear. At the head of the table, my father sat stiffly, his trademark confidence visibly shaken. James stood beside the projector screen, his CEO mask cracking under pressure. "What is she doing here?" Dad demanded. "Saving your company," I said calmly, connecting my laptop, "and maybe keeping you out of prison." "Prison?" A board member blurted. "Mr. Morgan said this was a minor compliance issue." "It's nothing," Dad began. I cut him off with the first slide, a satellite image of the contaminated watershed. "This," I said, "is the protected watershed your facility has been poisoning for 5 years. The EPA estimates damages at $50 million. Whispers rippled across the room. James went pale. I clicked to the next slide. "And this is your toxic waste disposal record, the one you've been pretending to submit. Would you like to see the real numbers?" "Now, wait," Dad stood, face reddening. "Actually, I can." I placed a thick folder on the table. "As the EPA's lead consulting expert on tech sector violations, I have full authority to present these findings. Would you prefer I do it here, or in front of a grand jury?" Silence. "Sarah," James's voice cracked, "please." "Please what?" I asked. "Don't expose how you cut corners. Don't reveal how your innovations poison groundwater. Don't show how you mocked the very science that could have prevented this." I turned to the board. "You have 3 options. 1. Continue ignoring regulations and face criminal prosecution. 2. Shut down operations until you're compliant, tanking your stock. Or 3. Hire my firm for a complete overhaul." "And your fees?" a board member asked. "Starting at $15 million. Full compliance will cost closer to $50 million. I smiled. "Still think environmental science is worthless?" My father slumped in his chair, the weight of decades of arrogance finally settling on his shoulders. "We can't afford. You can't afford not to," I said, advancing to the final slide. "Because in 48 hours, this report goes public, unless I submit an intervention plan to the EPA, which, conveniently, I've already prepared." I handed out copies of the proposal. As they flipped through the pages, murmurs of surprise turned to genuine interest. "These green manufacturing methods," one said, "they could cut costs by nearly 30%. "Exactly," I replied. "Sustainability isn't just good for the planet, it's good business." James looked up from the report, his expression shifting, desperation giving way to reluctant hope. "Sarah, this could work. This could really save us." "Of course it could," I said, eyes locked on my father. If only someone had listened. I had spent years developing these solutions, quietly, methodically, while they laughed at my career. Now, they had no choice but to listen. The board voted immediately. There was no debate. My proposal wasn't just their best option, it was their only option. "There's one more thing," I said as the contracts were signed. "I'm bringing in a permanent environmental compliance team. They'll report directly to me, not to Morgan Technologies management." My father looked up. "You don't trust us?" he asked, almost softly. "You haven't earned trust," I said, meeting his gaze. "You've earned oversight." The transformation began the very next day. We shut down the most toxic production lines, rebuilt waste management systems from the ground up, began long overdue environmental remediation projects. Some executives resigned rather than adapt. Others, especially younger engineers, embraced the new direction eagerly. To my surprise, James dove in headfirst. He studied sustainable manufacturing practices, asked questions, sought mentorship. Slowly, he began to see what I had seen all along, that environmental responsibility and business success were not enemies, they were partners. Within 6 months, Morgan Technologies had become a model of green innovation. Our cleanup efforts made headlines. The company's stock, after an initial dip, soared to record highs as investors realized sustainable practices weren't a liability, but a long-term asset. Dad took longer to come around, but numbers don't lie, and watching his company thrive finally opened his eyes. During a site inspection, he turned to me and said, "I was wrong." "About everything?" I asked. "About me?" He nodded. "Yes, you were. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" 2 weeks later, he announced a $100 million investment into environmental technology research. Morgan Technologies will lead the industry in sustainable innovation, he declared at a press conference, thanks to the vision of our new environmental director, my daughter. Afterward, James pulled me aside. "Remember when I said you were wasting your potential? You mean when you laughed at my graduation and told me I'd never succeed?" He winced. "Yeah, that." He paused. "Turns out, you were the only one who saw the future clearly." Last month, I was interviewed by a business magazine about the company's dramatic transformation. The reporter asked why I chose to save Morgan Technologies instead of letting it collapse under the weight of its violations. I showed them the before and after photos of the watershed we'd restored. "Sometimes the best revenge isn't tearing something down," I said. "It's rebuilding it into what it should have been all along." Yesterday, during our first family dinner since the turnaround, Mom looked at me. "I never understood why you chose environmental science," she said, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Now I see, you chose to save us." I looked around the table. Dad discussing renewable energy with suppliers. James animatedly outlining new green tech initiatives. A family finally speaking the language of responsibility and change. "You know what the best part is?" I asked. "My worthless degree? It's now worth billions, in saved costs, avoided lawsuits, and new market opportunities. Not bad for a tree hugger, right?" This time, no one dared laugh. Because sometimes, success isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving that doing what's right works. And sometimes, the only way to change an industry is to force it to confront its own toxic legacy. As for my consulting fees, they're still triple the standard rate. Call it what it is. An ignorance tax, payable to the environmental science grad they once dismissed. Because karma, like nature, always balances the books.